I was heading out to the river a few days ago, and I saw some signs for a woodworking estate sale, and I said, "All right, I'm going to that." And I found this saw, picked it up for $2.50. Pretty, I think, decent deal. The saw wasn't in good shape. It also wasn't in like terrible shape. Like it was usable as is. It just wasn't very sharp, and it looked kind of old. Um, so I decided to take it home, clean it up, try to resharpen it, and use it as a saw. Plus, it's hard to find saws like this new without spending a whole lot of money. Most of the like Stanley saws that I see, they just look really complicated and difficult to sharpen, whereas these older saws are pretty simple. Um, So, yeah, I don't really know what I'm doing here, but yeah, I'll try to explain my thought process. I wanted to knock off all of the rust first, so I used a wire wheel. Figured that would prevent the rust from getting on my wood when I rub the saw all over it. I also think it would reduce friction just a little. Now, after the wire wheel, I ran some 220 grit sandpaper over the blade, and that got a lot of the surface rust off. It's not going to make it look shiny, but I could tell the difference. It still looks old and rustic. Yeah, I'm fine with that. There's nothing wrong with it. The handle, it was in decent shape. A few cracks here and there, but nothing major. It was still very sturdy. So I hit it with some 220 sandpaper and called it good. Now, this saw is a Warrented Superior saw. When I did the research, basically that means it was a factory reject that they slapped a Warrented Superior logo on. So probably not an awful saw. It was probably a decent saw that had a defect in it. So I buffed out that Warranted Superior logo, and the pins I just ran across some sandpaper. I didn't want to bring them up to a mirror finish because, yeah, I think it'd look out of place, and I just didn't want to put that much time into it. I found that in order for me to like really respect a tool, I have to invest a lot of something into it, whether that's time or money. If I just buy a cheap tool, my mindset is, all right, it was cheap. You just beat it up, leave it out in the rain. It was a couple bucks. But if I buy a cheap tool and I spend a lot of time and energy turning it into something better, I tend to have a little bit more respect for that saw because I put a lot of my time towards making it look or feel the way that it does. That's what I did here. I was missing a pin, and what I did to solve that problem, I used this technique called just leaving it and calling it good. That tends to work a lot of the times. I figure I have 3 pins, that's 3 points of contact, the saw is not going anywhere. As for sharpening, I have no idea what I'm doing. But here's my thought process. The first round, I went through and cleaned up the profile of each tooth, and they were all over the place. So what this saw probably really needs is to have all the teeth ground off and new ones filed in. I might do that in the future. I wasn't about to do that this weekend. So I just sharpened it as best I could. I figure that's just a couple hours of practice, and I'm new to it, so it's not going to be perfect. Here, or what you just saw, was me marking every other tooth roughly, so I can keep track of which teeth I'm filing. This is a crosscut saw, so there has to be bevels on the teeth. The bevels should be facing right, then left, then right, then left per tooth. So yeah, I filed the bevels on one tooth, skipped a tooth, then filed bevels on that one. When I finished this side, I flipped the saw over and repeated the same process. Now you also need to set teeth on a saw, and that basically means bending it a little bit to the right, next tooth a little bit to the left, to the right, then left, then right, then left. And that prevents your saw blade from binding in the wood, basically so you can cut it a little better. There's a tool called a saw set, which you squeeze like a trigger and it pushes the tooth a certain distance outside of the saw. I don't have that, and I saw Paul Sellers do this. He flattened one side of a nail and just beat the teeth down a little bit with a couple strikes of a hammer. I don't think I did it correctly because I didn't notice any difference in the teeth. But I used it on this little log, and hey, it worked. It's probably the sharpest saw that I have at this point in time. So yeah, that's about it. I kind of wanted to make this video to show you that restorations don't need to be perfect or look beautiful. You just need to make the tool useful. Yeah.